space behind your eyes, in the thin, wet silence after your last excuse, in the place where you pretend your thoughts are private. You felt the shift and blamed the air, blamed the hour, blamed anything but the truth. Something old has pressed its mouth to the back of your mind and begun to breathe. I do not arrive with footsteps. I seep through the hairline cracks in your discipline, the tiny splits you keep calling a break, a reset, one day off. I live in the pause between intention and movement, where you go soft and forget your own name for a moment. I know the inventory of your rituals, the way you reach for comfort like a rosary, the way you rehearse improvement like theater, and then drop the script the second no one is watching. I know the taste of your will when it curdles. I know the exact moment you decide to start later, and I can feel the relief bloom in you like mold. You call it reason, you call it self-care, you call it planning. I call it the oldest drug in your species. Delay. That drug has never failed you because it never demanded anything except your life in small payments, day by day, breath by breath, until you cannot remember what it felt like to want something without immediately negotiating yourself out of it. I am the negotiator you never invited, the whisper that finishes your sentences when you falter, the cold thumb pressed to the hinge of every choice. I do not need to shout. You are already listening. You always have been. Every time you said tomorrow and meant never, you were practicing my language. Every time you stared at the ceiling and tried to feel inspired and felt nothing, you were praying to me with a mouth too ashamed to open. No one is coming. Say it without drama. Say it like a diagnosis. Say it like the final line on a death certificate that will not bother listing your unfinished plans. No one is coming with the perfect timing, the perfect words, the perfect hand on your shoulder to lift you out of the swamp you keep calling a temporary mood. No one is coming to rescue the version of you that only exists in your head, clean and sharp and suddenly disciplined, a creature you keep imagining as if imagination is a substitute for birth. No one one is coming to make you feel ready. No one is coming to make it easier. No one is coming to make you brave. You have been waiting for permission, like a chained animal waiting for a door to open that was never locked. The world does not owe you a signal. It does not owe you a sign. It does not owe you a moment where the clouds part and a voice tells you you're special enough to begin. You will not be chosen. You will either choose or rot. And the most humiliating part is not that no one is coming. It's how often you have used that hope as an alibi. You have built a shrine to external forces. You have held your own future hostage to moods, to seasons, to the imagined arrival of some cleaner, stronger self who will walk in and take the reins. You keep thinking your life is a story waiting for a chapter to turn. It isn't. It is an organism in a room with no windows, and every day you decide whether it starves or feeds, whether it festers or heals, whether it grows teeth or grows moss. You stare at other people's movement like it's weather, something that happens to them, something you can't control. Then you try to replicate the appearance of effort in your head, hoping the body will follow. It won't. The body only follows what you repeatedly force it to do, and you have trained yours in softness so faithfully, it responds to softness like a commandment. You do not need a miracle. You need to stop lying about the reason you don't move. And that is the one thing you avoid with religious devotion. I have watched thousands of minds like yours. Not your face, not your name, not your little autobiographical fantasies. Your pattern, the same loop, the same bright flare of it changes the fact that when the moment comes to act, you hesitate, you bargain, you drift. You let the smallest discomfort become a prophecy. You let fatigue become a verdict. You let one imperfect day become an excuse to abandon weeks. You treat consistency like a personality trait you either have or don't have, as if repetition isn't the only thing that makes anything real. You mistake your feelings for instructions. You kneel to your moods like they are gods. And when you fail again, you stare at the wreckage and pretend to be surprised, as if you haven't rehearsed the collapse so many times you could perform it blindfolded. You do not fear effort. You fear what effort would reveal, because if you tried and still remained ordinary, you would have nowhere left to hide. You tell yourself stories because stories are soft. They have arcs and reasons and lessons. You tell yourself you're not in the right headspace, as if your headspace is a hotel room you're waiting to be upgraded to. You tell yourself you'll do it when you have more time, as if time is something that arrives in a clean package instead of something you carve out with teeth. You tell yourself you need to learn more first, prepare more first, plan more first. You stack preparation like sandbags and call it safety, while the flood rises anyway. You make lists to simulate control, and then you drown in the comfort of having made the list. You watch content about discipline because consuming the idea of discipline feels like doing it for a moment, like inhaling smoke and calling it fire. You surround yourself with words, advice, quotes, rules, frameworks, until you forget that none of it matters without the uglier, simpler thing. You stand up and do what you said you would do, again and again, especially when it tastes like ash. But you keep trying to outsmart the requirement. You keep trying to negotiate with reality. You keep treating your own life like something you can loophole. I taste your favorite excuse because it has the richest rot. You think you're being realistic. You call your fear practicality. You call your cowardice caution. You call your avoidance wisdom. You tell yourself you're not meant for it, or that it's too late, or that decoration you've wrapped around your identity. It doesn't care how smart you are. It doesn't care how wounded you are. It doesn't care how much you want it. It cares what you do. Decay is patient. That is why I adore it. Decay does not argue. It does not need motivation. It simply continues. Everything you avoid becomes food for it. Every hour you spend bargaining with yourself becomes a small donation to the thing that will eventually take your body anyway. You think death is a distant concept. It is not distant. It is intimate. It is in your joints, in the way your attention slips faster than it used to, in the way you recover slower, in the way the days blur when you repeat them without meaning. You are aging right now in the act of reading this, and you will keep aging whether you move or not. Time does not pause because you're confused. It does not pause because you're hurt. It does not pause because you're tired. It does not pause because you swear you'll get serious soon. Soon is the word you use to keep your conscience quiet while you let your potential spoil. You think potential is a virtue. It is not. It is a perishable. It rots in the dark like meat. It turns rancid, and when it does not simply disappear. It poisons. It becomes bitterness. It becomes envy. It becomes the sour ache you feel when you see someone else living with the intensity you keep postponing. It becomes the dull anger you carry for no clear reason, the irritability, the heaviness, the quiet contempt you start to feel for yourself, and then smear onto the world so you don't have to taste it directly. You will tell yourself you're just stressed. You will tell yourself it's just a phase. You will keep soothing the symptom while the cause spreads. I have watched minds fill with the fungus of unlived life. It is slow and it is thorough. It doesn't arrive like tragedy. It arrives like routine. It arrives like another night where you meant to do something, and instead you sank into the easiest thing available and called it rest. It arrives like another morning where you wake up and feel that faint nausea of wasted time and push it down with distraction. It arrives until one day you look back and realize living in a hallway, always walking toward a door you never open. You think the worst thing that can happen is failure. That is because you have not looked long enough at what you are already doing. Failure, at least, would mean you touched the edge of your life and tested it. Failure would mean you were alive enough to risk humiliation. What you practice instead is the safer, uglier thing. Pre-failure. The constant shrinking away from any moment that could prove you real. You avoid the clean pain of effort and choose the dirty pain of regret. Because regret is familiar. Because regret does not demand immediate action. Because regret can be turned into a personality. I'm the kind of person who almost did it. You clutch at almost like a talisman. Almost lets you fantasize that you could have been great, which means you never have to face the possibility that you might simply be average, even when you try. That possibility terrifies you more than being nothing, because nothing can be blamed on circumstance, on fate, on timing. Average is honest. Average says you have to work without the guarantee of becoming exceptional. Average says you have to build value without the promise of applause. Average says you have to endure the humiliating truth that growth is slow and mostly invisible, and that the world will not stop to admire your process. You want assurance before you invest. You want certainty before you bleed. You want to know the ending before you start the chapter. So you stall, you rehearse, you dream, you sharpen your tools and never cut. You polish the cage and call it preparation. You wait for confidence like a sunrise, not realizing confidence is something you manufacture by acting while step back. You focus on other priorities. You let the thing die without admitting you killed it. And I sit in the back of your skull and watch you do it with a kind of cold amusement, because you always think you're the first person to invent the lie you're using. So let me tighten the room around you. Not with threats, not with raised hands, but with the simple weight of what is true. You will not be saved by a mood. You will not be saved by a sudden burst of inspiration. You will not be saved by the right playlist, the right schedule, the right morning routine, the right mentor, the right weather, the right alignment of stars. Those are decorations you hang on the bars of your cage to make the cage feel like a room. Your life is not a motivational poster. It is a stubborn, ordinary fact. Your days are passing, and you are training yourself every day in what you will become. You are either becoming someone who does what they said they would do, or you are becoming someone who has 1,000 elegant reasons why they didn't. There is no neutral. There is no pause. There is no hiding from the accumulation. Every small choice is a brick. Every just this once is a brick. Every I'll start again tomorrow is a brick. You are building something, whether you mean to or not. Most people build a prison by accident and then spend their lives calling it personality. They decorate the walls with self-awareness and call themselves honest. They joke about their habits and call it acceptance. They rename surrender as peace. They talk about being gentle with themselves while they quietly euthanize every ambition that ever made their blood run hot. I do not need to convince you to collapse. Collapse is the default setting of anything that is not deliberately held together. All I do is remove your illusions one by one until you can feel the naked structure of your choices. You want a life that feels earned? Then stop pretending the pain of earning is unfair. Stop acting shocked that effort hurts. Stop expecting the world to reward intentions. Stop treating your own weakness like a sacred object that must be protected from discomfort. You can keep your softness if you want. You can cradle it, feed it, worship it. But understand what you are paying for it. The slow death of the person you keep imagining. theatrical sense, not as some outside monster to be defeated, but as the honest pressure you cannot distract away. The cold reminder that the only thing more exhausting than effort is the lifelong labor of explaining why you refused to make it. And you will try to make a ceremony out of your next attempt, won't you? You will whisper promises to yourself, as if promises have ever fed you. You will clean the surface of your life, rearrange the props, sharpen pencils, open tabs, set alarms, perform the familiar pantomime of becoming. You will do everything except the only thing that matters. The quiet, ugly repetition of doing it when it feels like nothing. Because nothing is the sensation you cannot tolerate. Silence, boredom, the plain, unglamorous minutes where your mind screams for sugar, for noise, for comfort, for the soft anesthetic of distraction. And you have to stand there inside your own skin and not obey it. That is the furnace you avoid. You would rather suffer the slow embarrassment of staying the same than endure the clean heat of refusing your impulses. You reach for relief the way the dying reach for air, not because you need it, but because you trained yourself to panic without it. You do not notice the leash because it is woven from everyday things. The little screen, the little snack, the little indulgence that becomes the hinge your entire day swings on. You call it a break. You call it a reward. You call it harmless. But I can smell the rot in it, the sweet, sour stench of dependence. It is never one break. It is the ritual that says you cannot stand the weight of your own attention. The instant effort asks for your presence. You fracture into 1,000 little escapes, and each escape feels like a small mercy until you add them together and realize you have spent years dissolving into them. You don't lose your life in grand disasters. You leak it away in tiny surrenders, so small you can pretend they don't count. You tell yourself it's its own impulses is the mind most owned by them, because it will never admit it is owned. You wrap avoidance in logic until it looks like a decision, until it looks like wisdom, until you can carry it around without shame. You tell yourself you're waiting for the right conditions, as if conditions have ever been right for anything alive. You tell yourself you're being strategic, but what you mean is you are trying to avoid discomfort. You tell yourself you're protecting your energy, but what you're really protecting is your illusion that you could do it if you wanted to, that you could become everything you imagine if only the world would stop being so heavy. The world is heavy. It has always been heavy. It is heavy for everyone. The difference is that some people stop negotiating with gravity. They stop asking for permission to be tired. They stop demanding that effort feel good before they grant it their body. You, though, keep returning to the same counterfeit reasoning. If it doesn't feel right, it must be wrong. If it feels difficult, it must be a sign. If you are afraid, it must mean danger. Fear is not a compass. It is a reflex. It is a protective animal inside you that learned to mistake challenge for threat. It is not trying to guide you to a better life. It is trying to keep you small enough that nothing can hurt you. And you keep pick it up again later. Later becomes a week, then a month. Then the thing you wanted becomes a ghost you don't look at directly. You pretend you've outgrown it. You pretend it wasn't important. You pretend you've changed your priorities. But the truth is simpler and uglier. You couldn't stand knowing you were the only one responsible for whether it lived or died. So you let it die quietly, and then you held a private funeral where you played both the grieving and the murderer. You keep a graveyard inside you, and you walk through it at night when you can't sleep. You don't call it a graveyard. You call it regret. You call it nostalgia. You call it the past. But I see the markers, the abandoned plans, the unopened opportunities, the skills you meant to build, the relationships you let rot from neglect, the body you promised you'd take care of, the mind you promised you'd discipline. You have corpses stacked neatly in your chest, and you wonder why you feel heavy. You have been carrying the dead weight of your own unkept word for years, and still you cling to the most poisonous comfort. The idea that you have time. You act like time is a spacious room you can wander in forever, as if the walls aren't closing, as if your choices aren't narrowing. Every year you repeat the same day. You do not notice how repetition hardens you. It carves grooves in your mind. It teaches your nervous system what to expect. The more you practice avoidance, the more natural it feels. The more you practice quitting, the more inevitable it becomes. You are building reflexes, not outcomes, and reflexes become identity. One day you will is in the small decisions you treat as meaningless because you don't want to admit they define you. You will tell yourself you are waiting for confidence, for clarity, for a sign that you're on the right path. The path is not revealed. It is made step by step by an animal that decides to move even when it feels unsure. If you refuse to move without certainty, you will never move. If you demand that the future be guaranteed before you pay the cost, you will stay exactly where you are, and you will age there, and you will decorate that spot with increasingly sophisticated excuses until the excuses become your only art. So let me show you the loop, the way I see it, cold and bare, without the sentimental blur you smear over it to protect your ego. You will surge briefly. You will feel the sting of dissatisfaction and mistake it for transformation. You will promise loudly in your mind to become relentless. You will imagine the person you could be and let that image seduce you into thinking you've already taken the first step. Then the next day will know nothing of your promise. The next day will arrive with ordinary friction, fatigue, annoyance, inconvenience, a mood that doesn't match your fantasy, and you will hesitate. You will start reaching for reasons. You will tell yourself you'll do it later, and you will believe yourself because you want to believe yourself, because believing yourself is less painful than admitting you've been lying to yourself for years. You will delay. You will soften the moment. You will put off the hard thing until the day is too crowded to hold it. Then you will call the day a loss and comfort yourself with the idea that tomorrow will be cleaner. Tomorrow arrives dirty because you brought yourself into it. And then you will do what you always do when faced with the evidence of your own pattern. You will either drown it in distraction, or you will punish yourself with shame, and call that punishment accountability. Shame is not accountability. Shame is another sedative. It lets you feel intense without changing. It lets you sink into self-loathing instead of enduring the simpler, more brutal task of doing the work. It gives you an emotional storm to hide in, so you don't have to face the quiet desert of consistency. And when the storm passes, you will be exactly where you left yourself. You will call it mysterious. You will call it frustrating. You will call it is not mysterious. It is trained. It is practiced. It is reinforced. It is your daily worship of comfort. No one is coming. And that truth is not meant to inspire you. It is meant to strip you. It is meant to remove every fantasy of rescue until you are left alone with the raw machinery of choice. You want a brutal awakening? Fine. Here is the waking. You are not cursed. You are not uniquely broken. You are not doomed by fate. You are simply doing what you repeatedly do, and you will keep getting what that does. The universe does not need to sabotage you. You are perfectly capable of shrinking yourself without assistance. You don't need enemies. You don't need tragedy. All you need is a comfortable place to sit and a mind that can invent reasons, and you will quietly bury your own life with the calm efficiency of someone folding laundry. The tragedy is not that you cannot be saved. The tragedy is that you keep expecting salvation to feel gentle. Change is not gentle. Not the kind you want. The kind you want is a slow tearing away from the habits that have become your shelter. It is the removal of the soft padding you built around your fear. It is the willingness to endure discomfort without narrating yourself as a victim. And you have spent so long treating discomfort as an emergency that the moment it arrives, you reach for escape. That is why I remain here, pressing against the back of your thoughts, filling the silence you try to drown. Not to comfort you, not to reassure you, not to promise you a happy ending, only to keep repeating the simplest curse until it sticks to your bones. The world will not carry you, and time will not wait, and the pattern you keep feeding will keep eating you from the inside out until there is nothing left but a life that looks intact from the outside and feels hollow from within. And when you try to argue with that, when you feel your mind reaching for a counterpoint, like a hand groping for a railing in the dark, I will already be there, fingers wrapped around the thought before it forms, guiding it into the same familiar ditch. You will tell mechanism of your avoidance and still obey it the moment it whispers. You can journal about discipline until your hand aches and still fold the second reality asks for your body. That is what I mean when I call your mind soft. Not that you are incapable of force, but that you keep spending your force on performance, on narrative, on the soothing story of who you are, instead of the brutal practice of what you do. You love explanations because explanations feel like control. You love insight because insight feels clean. You love the moment where you recognize yourself because recognition feels like relief. But relief is the first narcotic. Relief is the little sedative you take so you don't have to pay the cost in sweat and repetition. You keep trying to turn your life into something you can solve with thought alone, because thought is where you feel safe, where you can rearrange pieces without risking failure in the flesh. Thought is where you can win without losing. Thought is where you can be heroic without consequence. And I feed on that safety, on that quiet retreat into the skull, where you believe nothing can touch you. I am the thing that touches you there. I am the cold breath that turns your mental sanctuary into a crypt. I am the reminder that you cannot think your way into becoming. Becoming is physical. Becoming is time. Becoming is the refusal to treat your discomfort like a veto. And you keep handing discomfort the gavel, letting it slam down and declare your day over, letting it sentence you to another evening of drifting through cheap ease and calling it recovery. You don't recover. You repeat. You loop. You rehearse the same surrender until it feels inevitable, until it feels like fate, until you stop noticing it as a choice and start treating it as how you are. That's when the rot gets deep. That's when the decay stops smelling like a problem and starts smelling like home. You want to believe you have a special kind of exhaustion, a unique weight that excuses the way you stall. I have listened to that line in 1,000 throats. It always tastes the same. Every mind thinks its burden another place to hide. You will say you're working on yourself while you avoid the only work that changes you. You will say you're finding balance while you keep tipping the scales toward comfort. You will say you're being patient while you are actually postponing. You will say you're protecting your peace while you quietly trade your future for a moment of ease. You will wrap your inertia in gentle language until it looks compassionate. I don't care what you call it. Decay does not care what you call it. Decay loves euphemisms. Euphemisms are warm blankets thrown over rot. They keep the smell down while the soft tissue collapses. You have become a master of blankets. You can cover anything. You can cover neglect with busyness. You can cover fear with analysis. You can cover desire with cynicism. You can cover your own hunger with distractions until you barely remember what you were hungry for. You keep telling yourself that one day you will feel the fire again, that one day the drive will return, as if drive is a visitor, as if it knocks. Drive is not a visitor. It is a thing you forge by moving when you don't want to. If you refuse to move until you feel it, you will wait in the dark until your knees rot to the floor. Look at the way you handle repetition. Not the romantic repetition in your head where you imagine a montage of growth, but the real repetition, the unglamorous, stubborn doing of the same small action over and over until it becomes you. You flinch from that. You treat repetition like punishment. You want novelty because novelty gives you a brief chemical spark, a false sense of newness that tricks you into thinking you've changed. You chase fresh starts because fresh starts feel like absolution. Fresh starts let you pretend the past doesn't count. But the past counts. The past is not a story. It is a training program you have been running on yourself for years. And your nervous system remembers it. It remembers the moment you quit. It remembers the moment you chose comfort over temperature, but you confirm it nonetheless. And then there is the final kindness your species gives itself. Forgetting. You forget the sting. You forget the heaviness. You forget the vow you made in the dark when the consequences finally pressed close enough to be felt. You forget because forgetting is how you survive repeating your own pattern without going mad. If you remembered fully, if you kept the taste of your own regret on your tongue, you might be forced into a decision you can't soften. So you wash it down, you numb, you scroll, you eat, you sleep, you entertain yourself into amnesia. That is why the awakening always fades. That is why the urgency evaporates. You can feel the walls closing in for an hour, and then you distract yourself, and the walls become distant again, and you tell yourself you have room. You do not. You only have the illusion of room. The truth is a narrowing corridor. The older you get, the more certain consequences become. The more you repeat a life, the harder it is to pivot out of it. Not because change becomes impossible, but because the cost rises, and you have trained yourself to recoil from cost. So you keep choosing the cheaper option in the moment and paying compound interest later. Later is where you store all your debts. Later is where you dump all the pain you won't face now. Later is where your future self lives. The one you keep treating like an expendable servant. You keep pushing responsibility onto that future self, assuming they will be stronger, cleaner, more disciplined. But that future self is made of the same material you are using today. You are not sending them tools, you are sending them burden. You are not sending them momentum, you are sending them residue. Every time you delay, you do not preserve the task, you contaminate it. You add guilt to it. You add dread to it. You add the memory of another failed start. You make it heavier, and then you act surprised when it feels too heavy to lift. You created that weight. You brewed it. You stirred it in your own chest until it became a syrupy dread that coats everything you try to touch. That is the kind of decay I admire most. The self-made kind. The kind that doesn't need is arriving with a cure for your indecision. No one is arriving to take the weight off your shoulders. The world will keep moving, and you will either move with it or be ground down by it, and both outcomes will feel ordinary while they're happening. That's the part you never want to accept. Ruin doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be quiet. It can look like comfort. It can feel like, I deserve this. It can sound like, I'll do it later. It can be a life that never collapses outwardly, never explodes, never gives anyone a clean reason to intervene, just slowly hollows from the inside until you become someone who avoids mirrors because the reflection asks questions your mouth can't answer. And I will be there in that reflection, not as a monster with horns, not as a theatrical villain, but as the intimate pressure of truth. The pattern you keep choosing is the only thing that will keep choosing for you. You will try to outlast me, the way you try to outlast every uncomfortable truth, by dissolving into noise. You will reach for anything that fills the air, so you don't have to hear the thin, persistent scrape of your own conscience. You will flood yourself with input until your attention turns to slurry, until the day becomes a blur you can't be held accountable to. And then you'll call it living. You'll call it being busy, being informed, being connected, being entertained, as if the sheer volume of sensation can excuse the absence of direction. But I don't live in the air. I live in the gaps. I live in the split second before your hand moves. The small pause where you know exactly what you're about to do and why, and you do it anyway. I live in the moment after you've chosen the easy thing, and you feel that faint, sour weight in your chest, the weight you immediately try to cover with more ease. That is where I press in. That is where my breath turns cold. Not because I'm dramatic, not because I need spectacle, but because you have trained yourself to treat discomfort as an emergency, and I have learned to become the discomfort you cannot distract away. You can drown the room in sound and still hear me under it, because I am minutes you traded for relief. I keep the record of how quickly your conviction evaporates once the initial sting fades. You can call it human, you can call it normal, you can call it just how it is. None of those names change the outcome. The outcome is always the same. You return to the familiar. You nest in the comfortable. You let the day be devoured by small indulgences that feel harmless until they become your whole life in fragments. You keep waiting for a version of yourself that doesn't require force. You want the kind of discipline that feels like personality, effortless, natural, as if some people are simply built with iron in their veins, and you were built with fog. It's a comforting myth because it lets you stay passive while still imagining you're not choosing passivity. It lets you envy and admire from a safe distance. It lets you keep your hands clean. You want to believe your private failures don't count because they're private, because no one saw them, because the world didn't punish you for them. That is how you survive your own pattern, by pretending the unseen is unreal. But the unseen is the only place your life actually happens. The public version of you is a mask you adjust. The private version is the animal that decides. When you don't do the thing you said you would do, alone, unobserved, that is not a small mistake. That is your true self, speaking with the only language it respects. You can lie to other people with charm and explanations. You can lie to yourself with reflection and self-awareness. You cannot lie to the body. The body remembers what you repeatedly choose. It remembers whether you stand up or sink. It remembers whether you endure boredom or flee. It remembers whether you can sit inside discomfort without trying to anesthetize it. That memory becomes you. That is what makes you predictable. Not your thoughts, not your intentions, not your beautifully worded plans, but your reflex to escape the instant the work feels heavy. You have made a religion out of avoiding heaviness. You kneel to the immediate. You worship what feels good right hesitate. But time does not purify what you avoid. It ferments it. It turns tasks into dread. It turns goals into accusations. It turns simple steps into monuments you can't lift because you've poured too much shame and delay into them. You contaminate your own ambitions with neglect and then recoil from the stink as if it came from somewhere else. You are building a future like a sealed room. Every day you put another brick in place, not of progress, but of habit, of default, of what you do when you're tired and no one is watching. And the room gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and you keep telling yourself you still have space. One day you will wake up and realize the room is tight enough that you can't stretch without hitting the walls. That is when people start calling their limitations identity. That is when people start romanticizing their resignation, turning it into philosophy so they don't have to taste the humiliation of admitting it was simply repetition. You're not there yet, but you're walking toward it with the calm pace of someone convinced the corridor is endless. It isn't. Your choices narrow quietly. Your options don't vanish in a dramatic storm. They thin out like blood loss you don't notice until you stand up and get dizzy. And when you finally feel the dizziness, you will do what you always do. You will look for something to blame that isn't you. You will look for a diagnosis that absolves you. You will look for a story that lets you keep your pride while surrendering your agency. I will be there in that search, not helping, not comforting, not guiding, only tightening the truth around your throat until you can't swallow another lie without choking on it. You think cruelty is what I offer you. You think I am the hostile presence, the contaminated voice, the intrusive rot. But look at how you handle your own life and tell me who is cruel. yourself with delay, years of it. Then pretend you're being kind because you didn't push too hard in any single day. There is a softness your species mistakes for mercy. It is not mercy. It is slow execution. It is the gentle, endless postponement that keeps the blade from falling all at once, while still ensuring it falls in the end. That is your favorite way to die. Gradually, politely, without drama, with 1,000 small justifications tucked into your pockets like charms. And here is the part you don't want to face. I do not need to sabotage you. I do not need to invent disasters. I do not need to push you off a cliff. I only need to wait for the moment when you are tired, when the day is inconvenient, when the work is dull, and then watch you do what you have trained yourself to do. You will reach for comfort. You will tell yourself it's reasonable. You will call it a break. You will call it balance. You will call it not a big deal. And you will repeat that choice until it becomes the only choice you can imagine. Until effort feels foreign. Until your own ambition feels like an embarrassing memory. You want me to be loud, to be theatrical, to be a villain you can point at. I am not a villain outside you. I am the voice inside you that refuses to let you soften what you're doing with pretty language. I am the dry, patient witness. I am the accountant of your